go to, but hello to everyone that's here. If you guys wanted to pop into the chat where you're joining from, I'm joining from Moose Jaw. I always say this, I stay home for these calls so that I can have all the screens I have in my home office that I don't have at my office. And Chris is joining us from Calgary, although you spend part of your time in BC as well.
I do, Gabriel Island.
Yeah. The place where he gets to, I go kayaking in Waccamaw, in Moose Jaw. He goes kayaking on the ocean.
I do. Yes. Actually, my wife and my son were kayaking in Silva Bay, just off the east tip of Gabriel. It's been a record whale watching season out there. Seal populations apparently, and two orcas, including one very large male, went right through the marina in front of them while they
Oh,
were in kayaks on the water. It's quite
oh.
something. You've seen them that close.
I mean, I would hope that my fear would able to be suppressed enough to actually experience it without freaking out.
Yes. Well, they don't eat people. So, you just
Yeah,
love research. There's
right.
no recorded incident of a killer whale eating a human, which
Yeah.
is why they call orcas. We're trying to soften it out now.
Right. Yeah. The name, that's not great branding,
No,
actually. We're
terrible.
going to talk about branding and marketing
Yeah,
today.
we're talking about storytelling. That's a bad story. So they changed
That
this.
is a
No,
bad
orcas. It
story.
seems
See,
friendly.
where my mind goes though is no known incident of them eating
Ah,
people.
yes, that's right, because they're gone. Oh, that's so true. See, there's a good story. The element of surprise.
Oh, I'm the eternal optimist. No, nothing bad happened.
Yeah.
Well, Chris, we're really excited to welcome you here today. For those of you just joining, Chris has spent like 30 plus years working with communities, getting to help them tell their story, be marketable, which, this pilot, for those of you on the pilot, I think that would be all of you, is about driving community connection and driving economic growth. And these are things that Chris has really helped communities focus on throughout the years. I will say he does it a little bit differently than some, in that I'm going to show you some examples, but he really does manage to inject some like dad joke humor into really everything he does. And he broaches some pretty meaningful topics with communities, helps them. What I noticed, Chris, about your work is helping them uncover their own personality in each of the stories. And so I'm going to share some in a bit. But I wonder if you could open up, Chris, just tell us a little bit about your background and what brought you to this, because it's clearly where you're supposed to be. And I know you do lots of public speaking and other things, but helping communities uncover their real personality and story seems to be in part of your DNA. So how'd you get there?
Sure. Let's start somewhere and we'll see where we end up.
Okay.
Look, as a kid, I was a kid of the 70s, and before things like show promos got boring, there was the world of jingles and fabulous commercials like the Oscar Mayer commercial. My baloney has a first name, it's OSCAR. Or Conjunction Junction. I learned
I'm
about
gonna be singing that song all day.
I know. I learned about Ann Butts and Oars from Schoolhouse Rock. Or Sunny Days Kept the Clouds Away at Sesame Street.
Yep.
There was just a fabulous world of very creative short form expression that is very sticky with people. And so I was always curious about that. It always stuck with me. And so I've had natural inclination in that space. Photography, I've always been a huge fan of photos. And I often say to people, if you want to see the world through completely different eyes, look through it through a viewfinder of a camera, or these days a phone. It requires you to focus on content and construction of content in a way that connects with people once you become more artistic at it. I just looked today at how many photos do I have on my current phone? 42,000.
Chris, we can help you with that.
I know. It's called editing. But bigger picture, I've worked in government my whole career. For a time I worked in the IT sector. But my dad worked for Industry Canada.
Okay.
My grandparents were, World War II veterans. Something my dad said stuck with me when I was a younger person. Acting in the service of others isn't a job or nice to do. It's an obligation to future generations. So the notion of service, to me, and you'll see it in teacher professions or nurse professions, and to me, finding your motivation within governance that can be really hard these days and increasingly hard as a way to keep your sanity, but also maintain your creativity.
Yeah.
Back in the day,
Oh,
sorry,
sorry. I
go
was
ahead.
going to just pause and say, you know, a number of the people that are on calls right now, some of them are volunteers, some of them they do the tourism, but also the economic development, but also the recreation for the town. It's like, when I think about what you just said about service, I think we've got a crowd full of people that are really, they're doing what they do because they want a better
Right.
for their community. Yeah.
For sure. From there, my first, I have a graduate degree in urban planning. That's a whole other story. I
We need
basically,
another webinar for that one.
yeah, that's a whole other therapy session. But my first work, in my first years, I was very lucky. I worked in places that allowed for creativity to happen. So the first bug I got in storytelling and structuring and the combination of visuals and words and creative forms, and do they connect with people and what kind of feedback you get. I remember we developed one of the first websites in Alberta for a municipality. This is the Stone Age. And so back then you could be more free, and the town of Okotoks' first website was literally called Okotoks Rocks. Okotoks means rock in the Blackfoot language. That's where I was working. And it had sections like, you know, the history was called the Stone Age, visiting was called Gathered No Moss, the government section was called Pet Rocks, and it was a little bit
Oh,
zany. And so we would get emails from people at the time. Some people absolutely hated it, but then we get people that would say, I pee my pants reading it. If that's the kind of community that you are, with that kind of joy of life, that's the kind of place I want to live. And so
oh,
that stuck with me too, the notion of connecting with people. I would say in general, curiosity and creativity, if you're naturally inclined, you will find spaces like storytelling. I do think there's ways to encourage yourself to do that. I always play around with words. That's why you see the dad jokes and stuff.
yeah.
I play with words or images or their mix, or pick up an object and create something fun out of it. Like, you know, eggs, we crack us up. Like, think of taglines or things that are creative. I find that that's really helpful in this space. And then at the end of the day, I just love a good story. So when I'm speaking, I'll tell very simple stories because simplicity is great in storytelling.
Yeah.
The mode. So I tell one about my daughter, Nicole, who would come home crying after school for several days in a row because the boys were eating her sandwiches at lunch. And so she came back the following week just jumping for joy because she had solved the problem. I said, how'd you solve it? She said, well, I was sitting there, picked up my sandwich, I opened it, I licked it, I put it back together, and the boys never bothered me again. So, you know, I love a good story in short form. So there you go. There's the history of
That's great.
why do
And
I do what
actually,
I do.
my next question was going to be, what makes a great community story? So you started with what makes a great story, simple, to the point, a little bit of laughter in there. You know, when you, and I guess I'll go deeper than just what makes a great story. When you start working with a community, because it does seem like you uncovered their personality, how do you get there?
Yeah. Well, okay, let's answer it in two parts. How do you get there? And I always say, I don't know what I don't know. And that's the way anybody should be, in the joy of discovery of even their own community, or kicking rocks and discovering, you know, back doors or businesses that haven't told their story yet. And you're looking for them. The things that are different are the things that stand out in our brain, just as a matter of neuroscience. And so, you know, tell, and even in a strategy sense, if you do something like, say, an economic development strategy, most of them I read these days are pragmatic, but they lack the story element. And to me, story is what holds the world together. So focusing a lot of time and energy on a vision statement that has actionable words in it, or emotive words in it, instead of just simple platitudes and pie in the sky, is really important activity for bringing people together. That is a key element of storytelling.
Yeah.
A value proposition. Why should I come to a community as a visitor or an investor? Why does a community matter? It's about different, not same. It's not about discover us. It's not about pretending that everybody will love us. It's about connecting with people who will love the reason we are who we are, and that we celebrate for being distinctive. And so it's just a way of trying to look at the world of different or better. I always say, is the key to this.
Yeah, I like that, what you just said about people. It's not about, convincing everyone to think that we're for them. It's about finding the people that love who we already are.
Yeah, and so I mean, we are inclined in governance world to think 100% of the pie chart will love us. I will always say, and I work with lots of rural communities, being comfortable with 5% of the pie chart is totally awesome, because then it gives you your distinct personality, your wording, your alignment with people who will most appreciate you for the 2 or 3 things that make you different or better than other places. That is very hard for people to get over. We tend to want to tell stories or produce advertising that are trying to appeal to everybody, and that's just a waste of effort and money at the end of the day. If 95% of the pie chart just doesn't care, they want to go to Vegas. I mean, why are
Yeah.
you trying to communicate with them? Don't. It's so there's a pragmatic part of why is storytelling important, and or what's its efficacy. The real missing piece is return on investment. Good storytelling motivates behaviors and actions that you want to have happen, whether it's someone who comes to visit or someone who invests in your community, or residents that are more proud of their community at the end of the day. And pride, and this is another thing that we tend to struggle with storytelling, is we tend to believe that the solutions and our path forward lies outside us. But 80% of investment, and it's been proven time and time again with research, is local. And so if we empower people with pride in their community through things like vision statements, key goals, some really interesting, ambitious actions. No one goes to bed at night saying, I want my community to be crappy. They all want their community to be awesome places. So can you have people join you in the sense of journey, in the sense of destiny? And if you can do that, and people are engaged and excited and prideful of their community, they will exemplify great things, from volunteerism to direct investment and business expansion, etc. So story is like a real nucleus and a beating heart of being able to do that. So here's a bigger set of what I would call, let's call them principles. I call them 6 principles of what a good story is, and then what is key story structure. And I think this is the real heart of what I would want to say over the next time that, I hope people absorb. We talked about bees. This is a little different, more important.
I mean,
Principle
bees
1.
are very important too, but this is
They
very
are. Look, they sustain the earth. Without them, the earth would disappear and die. I
There's
get
that.
it. Okay, fine. Yes. Principle 1 is that we are emotion-based decision makers. That means, I'll give you an example, an emotive word like legacy. If I used, if I used the word legacy on survey work, you'll get 10 times more response. Why? Because people are able to disengage themselves from selfie world and me first, and think about children and grandchildren. As soon as you're able to step people out of their current I'm too busy to think about the face of that child and the hands of that child, and our innate desire to leave worlds better places, it's in all of us, will engage people. So that's emotion-based wording. And so if you look at neuroscience research concludes that 95% of our decisions are emotional.
Yeah.
Do we communicate in that fashion in municipal or governance world? Generally, we don't, because we are fearful of the risks we take in expressing humanness. And it sounds odd, but it seems that we beat emotion out of things because someone will complain along the way that they don't like that story, it was too emotive, or it had humor, or whatever it was. But the reality is, research evidence says we are innately emotion based. So how does that translate? So I've talked about emotive language. Bigger picture, if we can feed story into happiness and the pursuit of happiness at our core, that's all we are as human beings. And so what does happiness research say? Well, there's the pleasure part. There's the part that makes us laugh. Can you reflect that in storytelling? That's a part that people gravitate to in their sense of happiness. The second part is engagement, friends, family, work, and hobbies. That is the power of connecting people to sense of community destiny, because where do you do that? Where are we at most powerful in our potential regarding friends, family, work, and hobbies? It's where we live. It's It's why the word home is always the most frequent response when you ask people to describe their community in one word. Home is an immensely emotive word.
Yeah.
And then the third piece of happiness is meaning. Who am I and why do I matter? By extension, who is my community and why does it matter? And if you can connect those two together into the purpose-driven life, again, the word destiny, if you can touch on all three of those in your storytelling, you're feeding evidence-based research of what makes people happy. And we tend to, where we are most disengaged with people is meaning, the bigger purpose. And so, you know, checking boxes, boring language, stories that we know we are generating, but not necessarily connecting with people because they're not abiding by the principles of things, are breaking the chain with meaning. And meaning to me is an exponential form of potential for people to invest in their community, from, again, from volunteerism to growing business, etc.
Yeah.
Another translation, dare to be different. So if we're emotion based, we see different, we don't see same. So if I often show an image of a whole grouping of green apples with one red apple in it. Do you see the green apples? Of course you don't. You see the red apple. And that's why things like value proposition, different and better, are so important to effective storytelling, because our human brain craves different. You do it. You're flipping through TikTok videos. What are you noticing? There's endless commercials. Which ones are you noticing? Flip through a publication. What are you noticing? And if your advertisement is a picture of a wheat field or a grain elevator, or in BC, I'll say forest trees and water, you look like absolutely everybody else. And so the art in some of the daring to be different element is telling people stories, where your geography is just a canvas. We often default to the geography because it's safer. People is where humanness and personality and emotions come from.
Yeah.
Translation, 3s and 5s, odd numbers are stickier with people than even numbers. This is just pragmatic stuff. Using people in photos versus geography. First impressions, research will indicates that you will register a positive or negative impression of a website in 1/10 of 1 second. How powerful the first words you use, the first image you show. Is it a needle in a haystack? Iconic, different, leaps out at you because it's got personality. 1/10 of 1 second.
Yeah.
Pyramid communications. So I've worked a lot in communications, and pyramid communications, you could look it up, but it basically means start with the end.
Yeah.
Have 2 to 3 key insights that feed that end, and then fill in with further data or evidence or detail down the bottom of your pyramid. It works. But what is required to do that effectively is your, what I would call a hook line, and your first sentence are critical. They will engage someone or they will not. That's the art of storytelling. Simple things, and this sounds odd, but search the term weird in stock photography. Like use iStock photo or Getty Images, whatever. Search weird, and you're gonna get stuff that comes back that is really odd. And one of the challenges I will often force myself to do is take the weirdest photo I can and tell a quick story that might align with a community attached to that. It's just a creative exercise. But searching weird is all about different and better, and finding the needles in the haystacks that more quickly connect with people, which leads me into principle 2. We have very limited attention spans, and the world is super noisy.
Yeah.
In messaging world, 4 to 10,000 messages a day we're inundated with. Pick up whatever you are talking about, speaking to, any of your publications. Out of the 4 to 10,000 messages a day where Nike is just doing it all over the place, and all the jingles and that are in my head from the 70s, compete. Are you competing? If you're not, we need to get more effective to do the things we want to do, which is build better and bigger, no, not necessarily bigger, but better communities.
Yeah.
Our attention span debunked. Microsoft once claimed that our attention spans were 8 seconds and a goldfish was 9. I liked that story because of the goldfish thing. How do they measure attention span of goldfish? But studies do say that on average, the typical attention span of an adult is 8 to 12 seconds. That's what you have to convince you of who you are, why you matter, the cool things you're working on, and shared sense of destiny. And and a call to action. You should come and join us and partake in our sense of vision of ourselves.
Yeah.
Um,
We do, I mean, it's one way, but we do pride ourselves and we do get some good feedback that there's no algorithms, there's no ads, there's no other people's
yes,
story on your page at Memory Keeper. It's you and your audience. But
yes,
yeah, even still, you have 8 seconds to kind of grip them in to keep going. And so those other
yes.
things like standing out, being different, engaging, yeah, important.
Principle 3,
Yes.
I call it the high five rule. And again, we love to, and I'll see this. Let's drill it down to simple terms. There's this mantra that seems to be present in communities that we can't promote certain businesses. And I say that's ridiculous. It's what you're it think about it in retail world. You're trying to show something on the end of the aisle that will make people shop further into the aisle. So if we create a tourism guide, we're not trying to create the A to Z that includes, gas station X. You need to lead with the things that are incredibly distinguishing. And so all of that is all around value proposition. Unless you're selling white underwear, you have to stand out from a crowd as different or better in some key way. Everything is a turn of a shreddy, different or better if you're going to be effective at selling anything. That's the way a market economy works. And so one of the hard things for communities to get over is that we're not trying to appeal to 100%. There are 2 to 3 things that would make us different or better. So let's translate that to, say, investment. Maybe you have great water supply. Maybe you're on a primary highway. Maybe you have a big labor force in a certain key area like manufacturing.
Yeah.
Those would be different or better.
Yeah.
In
And a lot of
tourism,
the folks on here, their stories are actually one of their differentiators, the history, what made the town, what's driving the economy now that's unique, that, or maybe what's not driving the economy, but the history of their resilience. And, there's, yeah, the story is in many of the cases, of many of the names I'm looking at, part of their differentiator,
yes, but I'll challenge you a bit on that,
right?
because one of the things we can do in rural communities in particular, and I've worked with 200 communities over the
Yeah,
last 15 years, so I see a repeating pattern, is if we're afraid of the future,
yeah,
we fight for the things that we know, and our traditions are very comfortable. But the
sure.
world that we are sitting in is fundamentally changing in exponential ways. And so if you just put up a sign on
Yeah,
your boundary that says where history lives,
yeah,
I would argue that's
of
not going to
course.
be an effective
Yeah,
narrative for your community moving forward. Because most people, if you're raising a family, trying to put a roof over your head, get to the long tail hierarchy of needs, enjoying your life through quality of life features like recreation,
yeah.
amenities, they're looking squarely through the front windshield, not the rearview
For
mirror.
sure.
So
Yeah,
there
I think it's
is,
more like defining, like maybe if there's been industry change, for example, not defining it as the industry, but defining it as the resilience of people
oh,
in this
perfect.
community
Yes.
that keep reinventing themselves, or,
Yes.
like how you pull from that. So you honor the past and then, yeah, straight out the front mirror, front.
Well, and one of the real and rural communities who've, they've been kicked in the pants a lot and can tend to, population decline, farms are getting
Yeah,
bigger. There's all kinds of reasons for that. But one of the real value propositions that smaller rural communities often don't realize is the fundamental good nature of people themselves.
yeah,
It's highly interesting to people that can't achieve that in the big city where you're more anonymous or you live your Dilbert
yeah.
existence.
They're not walking into a store and someone knows their name,
Yeah,
right?
like Brett Butt and Corner Gas is the perfect exemplification of people still want to connect to people. That's all
Yeah,
the art of storytelling. And rural communities do that fabulously well. People still look each other in eyes, a handshake is your word. A lot of those traditions um are highly connective to people that are searching for their soul in a world where
yeah,
that could seem wayward or lonely. So I would say, and sometimes it takes outsiders to tell you that how cool you are. But lots of rural communities have that. I would also say, and I'm sidestepping a little bit away laterally, but celebrate the things that are you maybe don't appreciate, because I have something in my head from Flagstaff region in eastern Alberta from a bunch of years ago. And this is Saskatchewan too, right? The old joke about the dog runs away for 3 days and you can still see it running, right? Flagstaff region, their investment section is called Stop at Nothing, and it's using kids and barbells and the power and, you know, of little kids lifting barbells. But the notion of nothing, just like Seinfeld show about nothing, nothing can mean everything to people who enjoy vast landscapes. Put a tourist from Europe into a farmer's field and a big sky
Yeah.
full of stars, and they will consider it one of the most magical events in their life. And so,
Yeah, I'm
yes,
thinking about your Norman Wells campaign, which I want to show when you're done
yeah,
your list. But
sure.
yeah,
But appreciating those things is, and storytelling around them with vignettes, I would say, it's really important. Okay, so that's the targeting part. So principle 4, we are multisensory. So we are talking now, but we are also very visual. We are a 576 megapixel camera. That's why images and storytelling is so critical as your lead. Brands that appeal, or anything that appeals to multiple senses, are more successful than brands that will only focus on one or two. Why is the bakery at the front entrance of the grocery store? You were being manipulated all the time by people who understand the value of multisensory
yeah. They know if I
connection.
smell those cinnamon buns, my feeling
Yes,
right away is good.
painting that. Should you advertise the golf course that exists, or should you tell a story that paints the picture of the hole in one that Bob achieved on the signature hole on your golf course?
Yeah.
That is the difference between just descriptive language and the conversion to a story that's involving a character and a narrative that has meaning, that's taking a piece of something that jumps out. And so there's all kinds of ways that you are manipulated in the multisensory space, but just think: sight, smell, sound, use that in your language and paint with those words. Principle 5, simplicity is the ultimate form of sophistication. Da Vinci said that. I use that phrase all the time, and it's very difficult to achieve. We want to write 100-page reports that the further they fall, the better they are. I don't do that anymore. I try and write strategies in 20 pages that are highly visual and look more like magazines, because the big long stuff doesn't connect with people in that world of short attention span. So if you don't believe that is true, read neuroscience research and marketing. It's fascinating. So there's this one experiment of they put 6 jams, different kinds, in a store and asked people to make purchases. Then they did the same experiment with 24 different kinds of jams. With the 6 jams, 30% purchased. With the 24, 3% purchased.
Wow.
Our brain craves simplicity. And so take whatever you've written and try and get half of it out. You know, that's a good mantra for simplicity. You know, an executive summary really should be on 1 page, you know, not 4 pages, you know, stuff like that should become
And it's
mantras.
challenging, you're right, but
So
important.
I often in my talks, I'll use this. There's a funny image. It's a restaurant, 321 East, and it's an image on a page. And the tagline or the story of the advertisement is, how good is our steak? Last week, a man who was choking on a piece refused the Heimlich maneuver. See, it's connecting with you.
Yeah.
It's a few short words that is making a connection. So there we go. Principle 5. Principle 6, and this is important because I think we often think of stories as just marketing, and it's not. Story is told through everything people see and do and interact with in your community. And so this word placemaking, or beautification in other terminology, is becoming actually increasingly important, not only as a matter of a story, but it directly connects with a key element of workforce, which is the 18 to 20% of workforce now. And I call them the independents, but they're footloose folks. They work in creative industries in the tech sector. They don't have an address of their employment location, like transportation. They may work as hybrid workers or remote workers. They have choice of location. And when you have choice of location, what do you look for? You look for cool places that are doing things different. And where do you do things different? If I'm looking around, you have a super cool downtown and you've got murals, or you have interesting sculptures, or, you know, ta-da, ta-da, ta-da.
Yeah.
The sum is the greater, and the parts of all those little small things you're investing time and energy into to create satisfaction in our eyes, which are 576 megapixel cameras. Now the key to all of that is two keys. One, it doesn't need to cost $1 million. It just takes some creative thinking. B, whatever you see in the world around you when you're thinking about how does our place look and how do we improve it, I always challenge people to turn the shreddy. One of my favorite marketing campaigns ever, turn the shreddy, a quarter shreddy, and all of a sudden the world was totally different. And so a good example is the city of Castlegar, where yes, lots of people have sculpture, but they looked to an inspiration from the United States and created an international sculpture walk. Now the key turn of the shreddy was that they asked their local community to vote on their favorite two, and they had pre-negotiated the purchase price of those.
Oh.
And so for a community where, Nelson to the north is much more of a creative community, and Castlegar was the business center of the West Kootenay, within 10 years, they have a trademarked international sculpture walk. They have an annual festival. They have so much sculpture, it's everywhere. People
Wow.
now actually travel on the Calgary-Vancouver route in RVs and make stops in Castlegar to see it. And the sculpture, because it's international, is incredibly creative. And then funny little side story, they've only had one vandalism incident ever. Humpty was pushed off the wall. That is true. Very true. Humpty lost it. There you go. So that's placemaking. So ask yourself this as a matter of placemaking. It doesn't need to cost $1 million. It can be a different paint color on a light standard, or a different way of lining up legacy or philanthropic giving in communities. Think never a dull moment would you take a picture of it. And if someone would take a picture of it, you're having your community and its product and its visual selling itself. My storytelling is easier to achieve because my product is more interesting at the end of the day. So that's really critical, is product matters actually more than story. Product sells itself. That's an old adage. My one little last point, boy, you've only asked 2 questions here. I'm just blabbing away.
We're getting good stuff. It's good.
To understand story structure, to me, is really, really critical to effective storytelling. And so again, I often use a single visual to show people that almost every story you will pick up and read has 3 key elements. 1, there's a setup. There's some kind of plot and character. We are painting the canvas. 2, there's a conflict.
Yeah.
There's something that's just not sitting well or right. 3, the conflict has a resolution to it. All stories are that. So let's translate that into municipal world if I am storytelling. Yeah. I'm living in my Dilbert cubicle in the city of Calgary, and I've felt like I've lost my soul. What is the meaning of my life? I am spending an hour commuting on Deerfoot Trail each way. I get home, I'm tired. I don't have time for my kids. Rural community X, where everywhere is a 2-minute drive, where everybody knows your name, where if you need to borrow the cup of sugar next door, Sally next door has that cup readily available. Feels good. It soothes my soul, and therefore I will consider something like that. Now, will everybody? No, it's not 100% of the pie, right? People still need to accept that some things in rural places aren't quite the same as the city. So it's a piece of the pie. But if you were talking to that person who in their head has great conflict with living in bigger urban places, you are talking directly to their soul.
Yeah.
So
And Monica, I think about your campaign in Weyburn. That was kind of, they were working on a campaign, and it kind of, that's how it spoke to me a little bit, is if I had roots there and I was sick of kind of that hour commute and that not knowing people, that campaign and driving that, hearing from people in the community. And yeah.
So just imagine every time anything whether someone's investing or visiting, say as a tourist, ask yourself, why do people do the things they do? So if I'm a visitor, and these days there's so much on TikTok and my TV and other things that I can do close in, the conflict you're creating, the resolution you have to create has to be pretty darn compelling, which leads you to talking about your 2 to 3 things that are elevated experiences that sit above the noise, not all the things. That's
Yeah.
really critical. And that is very hard to do. So in business world, remember I said we have a tendency not to promote certain kinds of business. You need to. They're the ends of your aisle. And you need to work with and educate others around that you were doing it for a reason. All the boats rise in the tide by using our shiny baubles
Yeah.
to talk about things that stand out from the crowd.
Yeah.
So that's critical too. Education around the principles of this and ongoing re-education gives you the latitude you're going to need to do more than, bland storytelling.
Yeah. Yeah. And we, well, something you said and something also Andrew Hertz, the Saskwanderer that we had on, said was that your community already knows what those things are.
Yes.
And so really first asking the question and engaging the conversation. And we've had communities that use memoryKPR to do that, to say, what do you think our hidden gem is? And you can submit it and you can tell the story and you can use your voice or video or picture.
Yes.
But the community knows. So if you're trying to narrow down, if you're like, I have 10 things on my list, what are the top 3? What are our bookends?
Yes.
Starting with engaging the community in the question instead of the answer is actually, yeah, it's a provocative way to come at it, I think.
That's perfect. Yeah, you're leading into the nature of how we ask questions, and engagement is critical. And so questions you are asking need to have sharp elbows around different and better, and try and get around the noise of the discovery, the
I like that, sharp
discuss,
elbows.
yeah, kind of verbiage, or even think of so a question that I commonly ask is provide a vision of your community in 50 words or less. What do you want for your community? And I will often use smartphone polling so that the words
Mhm.
kind of pop up and they start
Yeah.
moving around. But coaching through that will change the result immediately, because if you just ask that question,
Yeah.
people will say home, family, connections, etc. But there's a real effective technique, the 5
Yeah.
whys. You can
Yeah.
research the 5 whys that asks you to keep scratching the itch of the surface of that, to get at the beating heart of what you're
Or
actually meaning.
yeah.
How does connectivity, which everybody appreciates in rural spaces, specifically define itself in your community? Is it a specific amenity?
Yeah.
Is it the integrated connected path system that we have? Is it some kind of book exchange or food co-op? Like whatever it is, you need to boil down to the harder edges, and that is where you will find more effective storytelling, is not in the generalities,
Yeah.
but in daring yourself to say that's not good enough. Sharper, sharper, sharper.
Yeah. And I think, I think back to that, asking the community and having the right way to ask it is, we probably all know, but like you said, until you, yeah, it's risky sometimes, right? Because it
Yes.
might be the things that you don't think. And maybe I'll show some examples. I want to talk about some of your work and show a little bit of examples, but what I'd like to come back to when we're done that is that riskiness, is that, okay, we're
Yes.
in municipal government and there's some stick in the muds and there's some people who are scared to take chances. So
Yeah.
I want to show some of the places where you've taken chances. And then when we come back, talk about that. And I also forgot to say at the beginning, but if anyone has questions throughout as well, if you want to, pop in and say, okay, I hear what you're saying. Does this work for the bad guy in the story arc? Or, feel free to jump in. We want to, yeah, we want interactive conversation. And that's why these are closed for you guys. So, okay, first I'm going to show, and I know this is a bit older of a campaign.
Mhm.
It is for the community of Norman Wells.
Oh, actually, that's new.
Oh, is it new? Okay, I thought
Yes, in
this was the
fact,
older one.
there's
I wondered.
it's so new they're not technically using it.
Oh, okay. Well, what I wanted to do first was thinking of your comment about the census, and this isn't this, but one of the excerpts from it I wanted to read. And it says, nothing is everything. The North isn't about what it is in literal terms. The mountains, the water, the landscapes. It's that feeling in your gut that there is no one else on this earth that is seeing what you are seeing at this exact moment in time. And that feeling touches your soul in profound ways. That's one of the excerpts from here, but I also pictured that on a video narrative, like, you know, in memoryKPR or wherever else, but in memoryKPR, you can do voiceover on still images, and those words, we have some stories that we've worked with elders that have, you know, had excerpts like that recorded, and the voice just sounds so wise and so meaningful with the right imagery. Those words were, I think they were brave and powerful for a campaign. So yeah, beautiful campaign. And I just want to point out a couple of things, and you probably do too, but I love, okay, quitters need not apply. I love that it says the easiest way to getting here, the easiest way is the hard way. And we like it that way. Like, it's kind of cheeky, it's kind of fun. I can see here now that you're speaking about that 5%.
Yeah.
We're not looking for the people who want a 1-hour flight to Vegas. We're looking for the people who want a really unique and different experience.
So that's back to, and it's an observation I have generally about, here's a question I would pose. And it's about risk is a hard word, and I tend to shy away from the word risk. Let's call it dynamism or more personality. How challenged are you as a community? Because I find that the more economically challenged you are, or if you've faced a crisis like your forestry mill that's been there for 100 years closed, your willingness to embrace stepping out of the blur of the norm is much more attuned to, we need to do that. So one of the realities we face is that crisis creates creativity. It's just the way it is in municipalities. And unfortunately, there's so much room for creativity, even in places that are doing well, but crisis will motivate more. So Norman Wells is a perfect example of Imperial Oil, which has been their primary employer for a very long time, is over time winding down its presence in Norman Wells. And so the who are we, why do we matter, a bit of an existential crisis moving forward. Who would live here? It's difficult to get to, it's expensive. You have to accept that the services that we expect in other places are not here, but there's still something very powerful about that place. And so it's finding the story of what are those powerful elements, and then connecting with a more global population that absolutely loves being in wild, untamed spaces. It might be 1% of the pie chart.
And that's your 1, 2, 3, I guess. Be bold,
Yep.
and big like Mighty Mackenzie, survive the toughest trails, catch the biggest lake trout in the world. Like, you boiled it down to 3, but you have a ton of great information in here.
Yep.
I didn't realize they were going through that challenging of a transition.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, you know, but yeah, and that's incomplete, and you see it's so new, right?
Yeah.
So we haven't
Yeah.
completed the basic data. So, and one other little point in there is this is an investment guide. But you can see what it's doing is combining two things that are always at play in our brain. One is our lizard brain. Our lizard brain is our emotional brain, fight, flight, hot, cold. And so images, stories, words, creative word play is very important to that lizard brain. Then we have our rational thinking neocortex. That does want evidence. And so providing some data, investment related data called site selection data is also important. And that's the 1-2 punch of those. But this, almost all the work I would do leans more heavily on the emotional side, and that supports with evidence-based data.
Yeah.
Even in investment world, quality of life, for example, is a top 10 location factor, and quality of life is incredibly nebulous. It's very emotional. It doesn't have hard edges like how much does workforce cost to employ here, but there it sits in the top 10, and it wasn't there even a few short years ago. So storytelling and the softer emotive storytelling is increasingly important, even in harder edged investment world.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've done that, like are you motivated by the fear of being average? Scaredy cats need not apply. Fight the odds, explore, evolve, survive, win. Like, those are some powerful words and a good message. I did want to show the Castlegar video as well, but I want to pause first because we've not very many minutes left, and I want to, if nothing else, I want to make sure we answer anyone's questions that they might have. If anyone has a question for Chris, so prior to us showing some more examples, and B, Chris, I wonder, while we're waiting for folks to either put their hand up or put a question in the chat, if you could speak to navigating people who are scared of, and not, I think I've talked to most people on this call, and I know that we've got some very brave and visionary people, but they're working within a municipality that maybe, you know, has some hesitancy or doesn't have the capacity to want to go that bold. So I wonder if you could just speak to that and give the folks on the phone some advice when it comes to that, while we see if anyone has any questions.
Yeah, in simplest terms, what holds us back in this space? Primarily it's the fear of being different or saying different things or being visually different. Nature does that too, right? We tend to outcast the things that are different and introduce change, and we are uncomfortable with it. And the more different something is, our innate reaction is to be more uncomfortable with it. So one pragmatic way of getting over fear is use the words evolution, not revolution. So I'll give you an example. In Lillooet, BC, again, end of a road community, asking itself about its future more aggressively. It really is about the wilderness there. You know, animals surround you on a road, and you might as well just have a picnic lunch and sit there for a while until the herd moves. But it's also a direct persona of who they need at that end of the road, which is the top of the food chain, the grizzly bears of the world. And so year one ad, there's a bear looking through a window at a jar of honey with messaging and call to action. They said, that's great. Now challenge us. Evolution, right? Year two, hunter who is under covers, and there's an elk with a head turned sideways looking at that fella saying, get intimate with nature, Elkford, with key messaging and a call to action. That second year ad followed Elkford around Canada. Ministers were talking about, well, who is this Elkford place? And so growing into things one little step at a time can be helpful versus we're going to go to Zed in a flash.
Right.
It's too uncomfortable for people. The 6 principles that I was using earlier, write them down and use them repeatedly. It is an explanatory for why we need to do the things that we do. And where most people will connect, let's say I'm a council and I'm making decisions about money, or an economic development commission, or a tourism body, etc. The key question is, how much do I need to spend to achieve the things that I want to achieve? And that's just hard dollars talking. If I'm producing something 10 times and no one notices because the principles aren't there, the basic principles of storytelling, where I'm getting no positive feedback, then why are you doing it? And if I can spend on one and connect with people, that's a good return on investment. It requires you to adopt the fundamental principles of storytelling, period. The other thing I would say, and it's related to fear and how do we overcome fear, is we're using stories in silos. We love in governance world, silo, recreation, culture, economic development, planning, administration, etc. What is the big picture long term? What is the one plan in your community that has sense of destiny with that very cool vision statement and a 3 to 4 goals? Then I'm relating storytelling directly to that. When I am relating stories to strategic purpose that are big and pursuing that word legacy, remember I said how important that is, the salesmanship often will go easier. And then I would say, lastly, it requires constant re-education. Councils change all the time. The turnover in municipal government these days is crazy, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And so the sense of constant re-education, doing webinars like this, being online, going to conferences, you know, even a booklet on what is effective storytelling or brand building look like, is going to be required every time that you do this. And then the other thing, and I'll use basic principles, but try and simplify them. And it's just reality. So I call it the shark and the goldfish paradox. The shark, more bravery equals less consensus. The goldfish, communities must be creatively brave to get noticed. And there's no way around that just basic fact of life. Is if you're just going to produce noise, you're just wasting money and you're not achieving your sense of destiny and purpose at the end of the day. So don't do it. If you want to do it, it is going to require you to take a bit of adventure on your path. But it's hard. Don't get me wrong. It's hard. I've 32 years of running around this hamster wheel, and what keeps sustaining me is the bigger picture, longer term legacy building, service, and stories in service of greater purpose.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fabulous. Thank you. No questions come in yet, so I don't know if anyone wants to put their hand up. It's like, wow, you see, because you gave a lot, everyone's still scribbling down all their notes. And I should say, Chris would normally do this in a 1-day session, or a 2-day session, and he did it in an hour. So, so thank you for that. I want to pause for a second just to talk about Memory Keeper and some of the things you said. I think when it comes to building community, seeking feedback and input from your community. And also, when you were talking about this churn of new counselors, and having to re-educate. Memory Keeper can be a great tool for that too. If you know the vision, if you know the direction, if you're like, here's our step 1 and step 2, sharing, like doing an onboarding about the story with your new council members or a new mayor or any new officials, helping them come up to the speed where everyone else may be so that you're not starting from scratch could be a really meaningful exercise. And yeah, I'm just gonna share one quick example in Memory Keeper, but there's so many different ways towns are using us the more we get going. Like Kelsey, I know you've got your great mural walking tour. We've got some historical, scan the building, hear the story, but also tell your own story about this building or about this spot. We've got some tourism places where it's like, just share why you're here and where you're here, and using that to actually craft the foundation for the next level of stories. And so I want to, remind you all of some of the ways you can do that in Memory Keeper. And also, I'm just scrolling on this example, but I think back to those words I read and picturing that voice on a picture. Just a quick reminder that you can go in, whether it's when you're entering or otherwise, and add that voice on any picture. And it can be a really powerful, you're getting more than one sense at a time. We haven't figured out how to make it smell like gingerbread cookies yet, but just wanted to plant some of those seeds. And then Chris, just any closing words of wisdom for the groups here? Like I said, primarily economic development or tourism folks. Some of them wearing a lot of hats. If they're just beginning at saying, how do I uncover those top 3 things? Any final words of advice for them?
There's a couple thoughts I've had. One around and not particularly advice, just thoughts that you're queuing in my head. One around say history and use of history. People like history when it comes alive through stories. So what I would always say is, it's not the building, it's the stories of people who were in that building. So again, it's the 5 whys. Scratch it down to individual, really interesting stories. The second thing I would say is the role of technology is fundamentally changing storytelling, and it can be incredibly virtual, QR codes, what have you. Can augmented reality can place history in modern and really interesting terms. Ghost stories I've seen attached. One of the best things I ever did as a tourism experience was in Croatia, and we, in this very old community, met a lady dressed up who was holding a lantern that would creak back and forth, and we wandered around the community in the pitch black in a lantern, and she would stop at buildings and tell stories about what was happening in that building. Just fascinating, like just awesome. So think of turns of the shreddies ways of telling stories.
We've got some, like Sue's working on one for the founder of the town that I keep ever since she brought it, that she's telling the story of him, and yeah, I can't wait to see where that goes. But
yeah, no, my other odd, funny observation is I think we've lost the art of multisensory storytelling, because I remember as a kid, the most popular books in the library were A, pop-ups, B, scratch and sniff. And I was always mad that the great scratch and sniff
I
was
had a
always
sticker
worn
book.
out,
I had a
and I was
smelly
left
sticker
with like
book.
chocolate, which smelled like nothing, right? So again, the multisensory stuff works, challenge
Mhm.
yourself in that space. There's lots of options to do things more creatively.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Okay, well, folks, any final questions for Chris? Anyone want to stump him with here's where we're stuck right now?
Mhm.
He's ready for it. He told me anything goes.
No one has anything also. I just have one thing from earlier in the talk.
Yes.
Not necessarily a question, but just a comment on something where you said when a tourist comes through and they like look up at the sky and see all the beautiful stars, it's the most magical experience ever. Rings so true. I was just in Montreal and I met a guy at who was working at the bar there. And he had just came through Saskatchewan, or actually he was just kind of like touring the whole West, which he never done before. And the number one thing that stood out to him, just watching the stars in the sky in Saskatchewan.
Yeah.
He just came through, watched the stars. He said that was the most magical experience ever. So you nailed it right there. Like it
Yep.
doesn't have to be, I don't think,
Complex and
complex.
yeah.
Just an experience that you can't get in bigger cities. Like what kind of like draws you there or to your small community, whatever it may be. I
Yeah.
think like that really rings true, whatever it is. Even just for me, like a campfire or something, right? Like you don't necessarily have those in the city. Just like
Yeah.
roasting a marshmallow over the fire, that's just those
Simple
experiences.
things.
So think about
Eh,
that, just even in a simple tourism ad where you have two kids roasting a marshmallow around a fire and they're telling a ghost story to each other. That will easily connect with people. You said something else that's really critical too, and that is avoiding the complex in pursuit of simplicity. And so think of stories as vignettes. I think we often say we need to tell the whole story and spend 25 minutes doing that. Think of it as vignettes. I borrow sugar from the neighbor. I swim in that pond over there, and it's stitching like chapters of a story together in very short form. Always break down, and all storytelling is like that. What are the little things that we're doing? Like the campfire, drying our jeans over the campfire. We're all doing those things, and that's where humor comes from. Finding similarities, and the more common that similarity is, and the humor that we see in messing up around those similarities is often good sources for stories and humor.
And I didn't share those examples, but what I will do when I send out the email with the recording, I'll get those 6 principles in writing from
Yeah.
Chris as well, so that if you lost some in the note taking, you have them. But I'll send the examples out as well, because one of the things you'll see, and I think some of the things that you folks are working on very similar, is it's not necessarily that it's perfect, but that it's faces, it's real people who live in that community that are actually, the backdrop is maybe the mountains, but the thing about the mountains is the people that are, in that community, and the smiling faces and lots of that. So you'll see that in the examples, and I'll just send them out after when I send the recording out. So you'll keep getting inspired, likely.
Hmm.
Chris, thank you so much. You shared a ton of wisdom in a really short period of time. I think, yeah, we've got to decipher all of it because, yeah, lots of great wisdom and lots of, I think, very applicable messages for the folks that are on the phone today. So
Yeah,
much
thank all of you.
appreciated.
Go
It
forth
was,
and prosper.
we will, oh, and right, and I should have said, Matthew just shared Chris's
There you go.
website as well as Chris's YouTube channel. So you'll find some of the examples there, and that's where you can get a hold of Chris too.
You
That was
bet.
supposed to be my final message. Chris, where do they find you? But now we've answered that.
Oh, well, there's an email. It's easier to find me out too. I'm Chris@Rynic, RYNIC.org.
Okay,
There you go.
awesome. All right. Thanks
All right,
everyone so
thank
much
you all.
for making it again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.